What's up, everybody? So it's Chance back again with Bits and Bytes Software. I think is what I call my channel. Yeah, I wanted to come back. I'm kind of knocking out a lot of these videos today, especially the intro stuff, and kind of talking through some of this. I want to get to development, so it's kind of just me knocking all this like introduction stuff out, the stuff that I don't normally spend a lot of time on. I'm just trying to knock it out and get some stuff done before I get too far in development because I don't want to have to backtrack and like make up a bunch of this stuff. Anyways, this is going to be a video kind of talking through the tech stack. I don't think this will be super long. We'll see where I end up. But I don't think this is going to be a super long video just due to the fact of this. I don't think there's anything super interesting going on with the tech stack. I'm sure I left something out, but yeah, I don't know. I figure we talk about the rest of the tech stack a little bit. So this is kind of my idea for tech stack. You see I got the back end on the left, the front end on the right. So this will be containerized in some way, shape, or form. It'll probably end up being a Docker container. I may deploy to Kubernetes. That's kind of to be determined once I kind of get it built, or at least a good portion built, and I'm ready to start working on deployment, continuous integration, that type of stuff. Then I'll kind of make some decisions there of how to deploy it. But yeah, ultimately be on some sort of container. That's just where the world's at today. So it makes it easy on my side to build a container, all the configurations in one spot, that type of stuff. So I'll document that process as it happens. But yeah, it's going to be on some sort of Linux container, the front end and the back end. So it'll be two separate containers. This will end up being two separate services. The front end and back end will be deployed separately. I like doing that. It adds some issues and things to think about whenever you're doing deployments, but it is what it is. I like having them separate. The backend may eventually get split up into microservices, but this is kind of the, I don't know, not complete monolith version of doing it, is using a front end service and a back end service. Like I said, this back end service may eventually be split out into a couple other microservices. Authentication is one thing that's kind of nice to split out sometimes, but I don't foresee this being a super big application. So I may split out maybe some file service stuff once we get to that point, but it's probably just going to all be in the back end for a while, and then I'll make update videos, of course, as that changes. But basically, it's going to be one monolithic back end, one monolithic front end, and that'll be where that's at. The back end. So a lot of this stuff's driven from the fact of I'm not sure how I landed on FastAPI, but I really like the FastAPI framework, and I'll get into some reasons here in a minute of why. So I really like FastAPI. It's kind of a third generation Python framework. It's based on Starlet. It's asynchronous Python, fully Python 3 oriented with async technologies. So I really like it. It makes things kind of nice. So anyway, so FastAPI is the Python framework I'm going to be inside of. So if I guess that's good to have any, I would be backends in Python, front ends of course in JavaScript. But yeah, FastAPI for the Python framework for the backend. MongoDB for the database. So this is maybe more of an interesting choice if you're not familiar with MongoDB. So, and especially MongoDB in Python. I don't know if those are always glued together as much, because kind of the go-to Python stuff is using SQL Alchemy, which is not really MongoDB oriented. It's more like Postgres or MySQL oriented. So I don't know if this is a super groundbreaking thing, but I'm using MongoDB for the database. I'll kind of go into some similar reasons of. I chose FastAPI for a reason, and then MongoDB as a backend is definitely a reason. So I'll kind of get into that a little bit here in a minute. It's going to be on UVcorn as the ASGI server. The UVcorn will probably have Nginx in front of it at some point. I don't know if I'll do a load balancer or what, but UVcorn probably won't be ultimately directly exposed. It'll probably be UVcorn behind some sort of Nginx load balancer, or I don't even know if load balancer is the right term, but Nginx reverse proxy at least. So I don't like exposing anything unless I have to. Nginx is a battle-hardened web server, so I like exposing Nginx and letting it proxy stuff. Just, I don't know, it adds another layer of segregation, and I don't know how much security it adds, but it feels like it adds a little bit more security because you have that extra layer of segregation between what your clients can access when the actual external public-facing everything versus what's internal. So Nginx is battle-hardened, everybody uses it, so I feel more comfortable exposing that than just a UV corn instance. So I think that's what normally happens too. I don't know. Well, anyway, it is what it is. That's what I'm gonna be doing. So that's the back end. Super straightforward. It'll expose REST API. The front end will talk over the REST API. At some point in time, I'll probably integrate sockets. So I've kind of been, I don't know about looking at WebSockets, but I used WebSockets at one point in a job back a few years ago, and I never really dug back into them. That was WebSockets using Java, so it's a different world more or less, but I'm going to probably get into some WebSocket development with this just to get the experience of doing WebSockets, and like I said, I think it'll be kind of some interesting use cases for WebSockets for this. So probably do some WebSocket stuff, but for right now, it should be the REST API. Front end's going to be pretty straightforward. Vue.js 3. I really like Vue.js, especially Vue.js 3, and then Nginx, the web server that's hosting it, and then of course on top of a container, just so it's all nice and neat and got a pretty little bow on it. So these will it'll be in the same repository, so I'm not going to split repositories at this point. At the future that may make sense, but right now it's going to be the same repository. So any commit hash should be a valid hash, essentially. Everything should be compatible as long as you're on the same commit. So that's one nice factor of having them both in the same repository, especially since I don't foresee this getting very big, is I don't think I need the extra overhead of having multiple repositories, so it'll all be in the same repository, and then every time I push a commit, everything will be built, or both Docker images will be built, and then those Docker images can be deployed at the same time as well to keep matching versions. That is one thing to keep in mind, is whenever you're running a front end and a back end separate, here's the versioning and the API interfaces. So being sure that all your API interfaces are ready for their front end to take advantage of the new stuff, and being sure that your back end doesn't destroy some API interface that the front end was expecting. So over time, that's something to keep in mind, something to think about. I don't think I'm ever going to really run into the issue with this one, but definitely something to think about and keep in mind as you're developing and deploying applications is Murphy's Law, something about Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, or something like that. So always best to think ahead and say, hey, is my API change is going to make an actual major change on the web interface, or vice versa. So with that being said, I'm going to go into a few reasons why I like some of these tools I picked, and then we'll kind of call it quits there. So one reason why I really like FastAPI is, as the name spells out, here I'm pulling over, I don't know, hopefully this is pretty readable, but I'm going to pull over, this is an API I built, it's kind of an application proof of concept, I may still work on it some, but anyway, it's kind of my first big deep dive into FastAPI. It's just kind of a personal project and maybe a proof of concept, essentially. But essentially, the idea behind it was a dealer management software, car dealer management software. So anyway, back to this FastAPI. So if you've never seen Swagger, you should check out Swagger. So FastAPI auto-generates Swagger documentation for your API. And what I really like about that is typically Swagger, anytime you want to write, I forget what the document is, but it generates this open API spec. I guess the open API spec's not going to load. Oh, my server stopped. Okay, server stopped. Cool. Whatever, it's loaded. So anyway, so it generates the open API spec. There's a JSON version. I think you can get a few other versions out of it. There's some stuff you can twiddle and play with in FastAPI. It's in the docs about how to generate that spec. But essentially, it generates this open API spec or Swagger documentation, whatever you want to call it. And then you have this, and on your API, you have this /docs URL, and you go to that, and then you have this nice little documentation for your API. So, for example, like cars, I want to create a car, right? So I have this post request, version 1 of the API, car, create a car. And so that's right here. Parameters, there's no parameters, but it does expect a body. And so this is the type of stuff you get when FastAPI auto generates these docs, is you get like this example value. So you can have an example like, hey, copy and paste this example and create a car. Schema, so you have the full schema for creation. So you can see stock number is a string, what's the name of it, there's like default, so mileage here, it's an integer, title is mileage, and then default is 0. So you get a lot of really cool stuff with this. Mileage type, you have an enumeration, so you can do enumerations of things, and then so you can also click in here and see, okay, well, mileage type, so currently the only enumeration available is actual, but title type, for instance, I don't know if you've ever seen cars, but you have a clean, a salvage, and a rebuilt title, or 3 common car titles, and so you can specify that. So title type, it's going to be stored as a string or sent as a string. It's named, there's a title, the default, so what the default value is, but like I said, this enumeration value here, it shows what all the possible enumeration values. So as you add more enumeration values, it automatically updates your API spec to follow that. So super nice in that sense. You can see another example of conditions, new, used, and rebuilt. Let's see, conditions. So this is 1 through 10 of condition of the car, default 5. So kind of rinse and repeat all the way down. You do get indicators for what's required, and so when you build out your stuff in your back end, you can specify, and I'll show you how this gets generated, but there's spots you can specify. So this is required, so anything with a red asterisk is required. So year, make, model, and VIN are all required fields. Most of this other stuff is not required. So anyway, you get all sorts of fun stuff. There is some built-in validation there, so you can do some validation of like it has to be at least 6 characters, that type of stuff. You do get some built-in validation. And if you're missing a required field, for instance, it'll auto throw that back at the user and say, hey, we're missing this value, that type of thing. Let's see, colors, another example of a big enumeration, all the different variations of color, all the way down. So that's super cool. Responses as well. So that was a request. So that's what you're sending into the API. You can even do nested stuff. So like you can see purchase price is a nested object. So if I click down here, then you can see how, well, inside of the purchase price object, there's creation timestamps. And I think if I go back to the example, I think it had integrated. Yeah, so this is a nested object. Purchase price is a nested object. So there's an example with a nesting. When you send it in, you can do that. Creation timestamp shouldn't actually be there. It should be auto-generated. But anyway, price would be the thing you're sending in. And the response, you get the same thing back. So you get an example value for the response back. You can modify this and make this nice and neat and pretty. And then schema, so here's the schema you're going to get back. So you can see anything that's going to be sent back, it's a required field. So you don't have to check for optionals and stuff. And then anything that's not required, so it would be an optional on your front end. And so all the way down, like say, it even enumerations get spit out here, that type of stuff. So anyway, so it auto-generates all this documentation, and it's super nice and neat. And with the Python APIs and stuff, it makes it where it's really intuitive to use as well. You can see nested objects here, so like purchase price, there's a price, who updated it, that type of stuff. And then you can also specify what your errors are. So in this case, it's just a validation error, so it's schema validation. This is the built-in error response, but you can add custom error responses. So if you send it back a 401 for unauthorized, that type of stuff, so you can integrate all of those error responses. And so you get this nice, awesome API documentation. I think you can do like descriptions and like all sorts of fun stuff. Anyway, so you auto-generate this nice API doc that's auto-updated with all of your stuff as you build out the API. Well, the other cool part about that is you can code generate your client-side interfaces, and so you end up with a type-safe client-side interface if you're using TypeScript on your front end, or just some interface that's has typing. So if you use a Python, you can use the Python client or code generation. You can use like I use the TypeScript. Vue.js 3 has more or less pretty good TypeScript integration at this point. And so I can generate the TypeScript APIs, and so the TypeScript APIs come back with a client with a type-safe-ish to the point your IDE can handle it, but type-safe-ish API that you can interact with. And so anyway, you see a bunch of these examples. These are all schemas that it dumps out. So anyway, it builds out all these schemas, but you don't actually have to care about most of the schemas. Usually what you care about is the actual API endpoints. But anyway, you can see all the different variations of different endpoints you have, that type of stuff. So anyway, this is auto-generated. And you can also interact with it, right? So you can come down here to create a car, right? You could try it out. You could go in here, type out your car, interact with it. So that's kind of helpful with basic debugging and stuff. You can authorize it. So in this case, I have it set up for a JSON web token. Put the token in here, authorize, and then that token will be sent with all your requests. And you can kind of see, I don't know if it's super easy to see, but there is a lock on the ones that need authentication. There's a little lock that shows up. Like I said, it may not be super visible. You can see the arrows a little different on these because of my scheming and everything. But yeah, so that's that. I'll kind of show you. I got one of the APIs pulled up here to kind of show you how some of this ties together and kind of why it's super straightforward to use and not like it actually makes it really nice to build your APIs. So, so similar if you use Flask or that style of Python framework, but you essentially, I've got routers here, so each of my files get a router, and then in this case, you can put tags on it. So tags is what corresponds to this, so like cars right there. So everything with a tag of cars will go into that. You can prefix. So in this case, I prefix my API with /car for this router. This whole router has the prefix for a car. And then dependencies. So this is one thing about FastAPI that's also really nice. You can do dependency injection. So this whole router is going to be is going to require authentication. So, and this is how you specify dependencies on the whole router. Dependencies, if you want to dig more into that, FastAPI documentation. But basically, this is saying, hey router, be sure everything, all requests to this router, hit this router, should require authentication. So you should have some sort of basic authentication in order to interact with this. Otherwise, you're going to just get a 401 unauthorized. And then that router, you just do .post or .put, .get, the typical things you're used to with like a FastAPI style framework. I think Bottle uses a similar framework to do that. And then what's your URL? So what your endpoint is going to be. So in this case, /car/create, which we saw here, /car/create. I've got a little more like fancy stuff I put in there for versioning. So in this case, like the V1 corresponds to version 1. So you could have a version 2, version 3 of your API. And then create car. So this name of your function gets translated into, so in this case, create car. So it takes a snake case, turns it into camel case. So update car, public car, that type of stuff, those get translated into camel case for your description right there. Kind of where some of the stuff starts tying in is the response model. So the response model is telling FastAPI, here's what I'm expecting as a response. So if I dive into there, this uses Pydantic for all the typing. And so that's what FastAPI integrates with is Pydantic. So all of your Pydantic models, this is some syntactical sugar flavor I've added in there. But basically, most of my objects are going to have some basic things like create. So create, and then update, and then response. So several of my things are going to have these basic things. You can see I got some other variations here, but basically they're going to have those three plus whatever else I need to specify models for. And so you can see all the stuff that comes through here, and this is all the stuff we saw on the front end under cars, create. So this schema that gets, I guess this is a response schema we're looking at right now. Let's see, response schema. So you can see all this schema is actually derived from all of these. So in this case, I did some really basic stuff. You can add these field qualifiers to do extra fun, extra interesting stuff. But if you don't, it just defaults to this. As far as typing goes. So in this case, I've had deleted. It's a Boolean that gets passed forward and back. Is it archived? Is it public? And then you can see some optional stuff. So like dealer ID is optional. So anytime you add this optional, it's not required. So you can see dealer ID does not have the red asterisk. Neither does stock number. Stock number is an optional string. But like mileage, mileage exempt, all that type of stuff is required. So anyway, so that's how FastAPI knows how all that stuff works. And then let me see if I can find a more interesting one for see if I can find an interesting one. Anyway, I might just look at car creation. So like in this case, car creation. So in this case, I had the field. So this is a default 0. So this allows Pydantic to know what the default is. So Pydantic will automatically do that. If this is, so this, you can see this is optional. So Pydantic will automatically put a 0 into that, automatically put a false into that. So you can do the same thing with enumeration. So enumerations work the same, just like any other Python type hinting works, just with the extra Pydantic stuff in there to kind of tie it all together. You can see you can do float values. You can do all sorts of fun stuff here to make all that happen. There is a title field. So I think I saw it somewhere in here. There's a title. Mileage exempt has a title, looks like. I think it defaults to whatever the name is of the type, maybe, or the I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what it defaults to, but if you can add it in this field, you can add a title equals Nickname field or whatever. Right. So you can add a title, then that would fill in the title there. Like I said, defaults, it's got some defaults that make sense there. Like I said before, you can add some qualifiers. So in this case, max length. In this case, I want greater than 1850, that type of stuff. So you can add qualifiers, and those will go through the validators on FastAPI automatically. They have a bunch of basic ones you can put in there. I think you can even do your own like custom ones. So those are things. If you specify enumerations, it will validate that they send a valid enumeration value. Anyway, so you get a lot of this fun stuff that makes it super easy to develop against and super easy to come back and use later. So all your Python is going to be type hinted because you're using all these models, and then all your API endpoints and stuff and your documentation will also be type hinted because you're using the models. So it makes it nice and neat to go all the way through your application. It's all type hinted. Same thing for passing values in, so you can dig more into FastAPI, but same thing for passing cars. So like this car, I'm expecting car create, and so that car create, that was a model we were looking at a second ago, so that's how it knows what you're passing in, what you're expecting here. So all of your function arguments will be parsed through, and they'll determine if what you're looking for and how to best handle that. So by default, it uses bodies for a lot of stuff. There are different ways to do get arguments, stuff like that. So, but by default on a post request, it puts it all in the body. Yeah, so that's that. Like I say, super nice and neat. It makes this API really, like I say, I like using FastAPI a lot, and so that's what I'm going to use them for this application. I'm probably going to have a starting point I copy on, and so I'll may do some basic documentation of that. But yeah, and then you can see I've got a car service, so as all good applications, everything should be structured in some sort of framework, like MVC framework, or however you want to do it. Just have some sort of structure there. And so in this case, right, I've got a service. FastAPI is dependency injected Python, so it is super nice and neat in the sense if you get dependency injection. And so you see I got a car service. I use the same depends as I used up here to require authentication. This depends down here and I pass in the type. So this is the car service class that I want to pass in. You can depend on a class or a function, and then now I can use that car service and I can create a car. So there's some nice and neat stuff in here that happens whenever this happens. So like car service, I just went to the car service. Dependency injection is all the way down, so you can nest. You can recursively essentially inject things. So if you have a dependency, you can inject dependencies. So in this case, just the class constructor, I have a depends for the kernel with authentication required, and then like an image service. So I have another service here, it's the image service, and then you can do whatever you need to do here for your initialization of your service, and then you get your service, and then you get really nice and neat services, just due to the fact of you can kind of separate all this stuff out, like the authentication required type stuff, right? You come in here, I've got a kernel, kernel authentication required. You can see I didn't completely flesh out some of my kernel stuff. Some of that's there for future development. But in the case of kernel authentication required, you can see I have a credentials thing, and that's getting called, dependency require auth. So that was the require auth we saw a minute ago. And so that gets called. You can see I just got a little debug statement. But anyway, I get the authentication credentials back from that require auth function, and then I can set up whatever I need to do there. I do some basic like caching too. So like, hey, I'll get the credentials from the user. Hey, if I don't have user ID, if I do, then I'll, okay, cool. Well, I'll go ahead and make the database call to get the user by ID, and then save it in my user, and then I can pass that back, do some basic caching, so you don't hit that type of stuff. But anyway, it just makes it nice and neat. I really like the whole framework you get from FastAPI and how clean it makes everything to plug together, especially with dependency injection. That's one thing I haven't seen a lot of dependency injection Python historically. It is a thing that I always like using. I've used it in every job I've had so far, and so I really like dependency injection. But like I say, it's been kind of not really a thing historically in Python. But like I say, it's super nice to use. Makes these things like this super easy. So now I just have the kernel, I have the image service or whatever. Whatever I need to do there. I guess the image service here, so I can call the image service. This is asynchronous Python, so I have asyncs and awaits. As I call stuff and get stuff back, self get card, all this nice and neat stuff. You can see some of my disgusting code here. But anyway, yeah, so this is FastAPI. Oh, MongoDB. So this integrates down with Mongo. So let me go see if I have, I guess I can go one of these models and just go up here. So I have some basic database stuff fleshed out that makes all this stuff pretty nice and neat to use. So I integrate with Mongo. And the reason behind that is with Pydantic, the models and all the data is super flexible. So because you're specifying it in type hinted Python, you don't have to be near as strict on your database functionality, on your database integration. So instead of using a typical SQL Alchemy and having the Pydantic models and the SQL Alchemy models, I just have the Pydantic models, and the Pydantic models are used for the database and for all the API doc generation. So, and all my type hinting. So it makes for one model all the way through my stack. And that's just kind of why I chose MongoDB, because MongoDB is super flexible on how you store your data. So basically anything I can define in Pydantic, I can also define in the database. It does limit you a little bit because you have to think a little differently, like relational keys don't make sense, and there's some variations there of things that you have to think about that's probably not typically thought about whenever you're doing database design if you are using MongoDB, but it's kind of a different style of database than your typical relational database. So anyway, so that's kind of why I went MongoDB. Is anything I can define in Pydantic, I can encode in JSON. Pydantic has built-in stuff to dump to JSON. So basically anything I can derive, I can turn it into JSON and store it in, or BSON for MongoDB. And so you can see I got some of these basic models, some of this basic stuff, really super straightforward stuff. But I have a helper, and it's a generic class. So if you've ever seen generics in Python, but anyway, so you have this model, it's all generics. So anyway, so I define a helper, like insertion. So I just get, like in this case, I get a clean Mongo dictionary. I've got some helpers that I defined here. But clean Mongo dictionary, and then I just call insert one on the collection. So I take that dictionary. So this takes that Pydantic model. So in the input, I can have, this is all the different versions I have. Base model is the Pydantic thing. I can have a dictionary or a list being passed in. This is just a helper function I defined to get back to the clean dictionary. And once I have a dictionary, it's just, insert, cool, dump straight to JSON or BSON to take right into Mongo. And then somewhere thing back out. So in this case, I can find one, come back out with the model dictionary, and I literally just unpack that dictionary and send it right into the constructor of the model constructor coming back from the database. And now it's a type safe Python object. You can see in this case I return an optional model, and then at this point I use JetBrains PyCharm, and so all this integration seems to work really well for all the generic everything for type hinting and everything. So I get back an optional type hinted thing, update one, I get back, it's not optional, that type of stuff. I got some basic deletion and archiving, that type of stuff. So I've even got some filtering I built up. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And so that's kind of why I chose MongoDB over a typical database, is just because if I can define it in Pydantic, I can save it in the database. And so I get the freedom of writing the Python and not necessarily worrying about the database, especially once I wrote this helper. I still got a little bit of rough around the edges spots, and I'll dig more into a bunch of this as I get in further videos. But anyway, this is my helper, and this is kind of overview of why I chose the stack I did. There are tons of other things I'm using other than these high level, like, super big word things, but this is kind of the big overview, and I'm already at almost 30 minutes, so all my videos are going to be long rambling, I guess. We'll see. If I'm going to say this, I'm going to regret saying this. If you don't like the ramble in this, comment down below. I may not matter. I don't know. We'll see. I may get better over time. I don't know. We're kind of, see, these aren't lined up anymore. But these are all going to be kind of rambly just because it's kind of over the shoulder style of teaching. So if there's something else you want to see, something else, that type of stuff you want me to deep dive into, feel free to comment down below. That's probably the more likely comments I'll look at and take seriously, is if there's something else you want to see, something else I didn't cover, questions about why I chose something, questions about how I plug stuff together, that type of stuff. like I say, I'll get a lot more in depth over time, just because as I dig more into this project, I'll be able to showcase more of everything instead of making a 6-hour long video of me putting everything in one video. So anyway, like, comment, subscribe, share. This is actually the third video I'm making today. My voice is going to be shot tomorrow, but it is what it is. I wanted to get some of these initial videos built just so I can start development. So I really like development. I don't really like this stuff, I'll be honest. So anyway, I wanted to get a bunch of this fleshed out so it's more of an as I go, start to end type stuff instead of oh, let me jump back and talk about this, instead of like, oh, this is kind of progression. So anyway, like I said, like, comment, subscribe, dislike it, whatever you think. Anyway, go from there. Catch y'all later.